I think we're live. Hello, everyone. This is Aditya Shankar Chattopadhyay on behalf of the team Voyages into the Past, Otit Prabaho. Today, we have with us Dr. Amit De. Dr. Amit De is a professor of history in Department of History, Calcutta University. Earlier, he was a reader of history in Kolani University. He is a very familiar face in the academic circle relating to history. He did his PhD University of London. He is also postdoc in University and he is the author of 4 monographs. Uh, the Image of Prophet in Bengali Muslim Piety, 1850 to 1947, Sufism in India, the Islam and Islamic mysticism in medieval and modern India, and Islam in South Asia. Besides that, he is also edited as well as co-edited several books. Today, he will share his view on Sufism in India. So, without any further delay, I invite Professor De to share his view with us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Aditya, for a very generous introduction. I'm also particularly grateful to Sombit Raichodhuri, who contacted me on behalf of Voyages into the Past and asked me whether I'm prepared to share my views on any area related to my research. So then I instantly responded. I was very much impressed to see the enthusiasm of this very young group of budding scholars, mainly representing Presidency University. Uh, so I decided to speak on Sufism in the South Asian context. Uh, I will take 50 minutes or 55 minutes to discuss on Sufism in the South Asian context. And if you have any query, you are most welcome to raise your queries, and hopefully we can have a very lively interaction after I finish my talk. Now, I think it is helpful if we start with a historiographical perspective so far as Sufism in the South Asian context is concerned. You have to understand that the pioneering role, so far as interest in Sufism is concerned, the pioneering role was not played by South Asian historians, subcontinental historians. Pioneering role had been played by the Atlantic West, scholars from the Atlantic West. Now, I'm putting emphasis on this term Atlantic West because later on I may have the opportunity to cite the works of some scholars who would not necessarily be representing Atlantic West, but transatlantic West. So we can, so far as historiographical intervention is concerned, relating to Sufism in the South Asian context, we can start with this, the interest of transatlantic West. That would be followed by the intervention of Indian historians. And Indian historians did not constitute any monolithic group. They represented a heterogeneous group that we shall have occasions to discuss. And then as a third phase, we shall see that there was a very direct transatlantic intervention so far as South Asian Sufism is concerned. Now, each phase is very significant that you have to understand for a proper understanding of Sufism, particularly with reference to the research carried out regarding Sufism in the South Asian context. Now, during the first half of the 20th century, you will find that the nationalist historians were interested in Sufism. We shall explain why. And in the immediate aftermath of partition and independence, we see that left historians also showed interest in Sufism. We shall again discuss why. But whether they are nationalist historians or left historians, they were Indian historians. But we should start before that period, when we see, as I have already indicated, transatlantic interest in Sufism. Then we noticed scholars mainly from Germany, France, England have shown interest in Sufism. But you have to understand that in the late 19th century, those who showed interest in Sufism, mainly the Indologists or scholars, Orientalists from the transatlantic region, they were not necessarily interested in South Asian Sufism. That you have to keep at the back of your mind. They were mainly interested in Middle Eastern Sufism. Why? Because they believed that if you have to study Islam, if you have to study Sufism, then the ideal place, ideal geocultural region would be the Middle East, not South Asia. South Asia was for a long time considered as a periphery so far as Islamic studies are concerned, so far as mystical studies are concerned relating to Sufism. This is very much important. So Reynold Nicholson, Arthur J. Arbery, or Thomas Arnold, they in the late 19th and early 20th century showed interest mainly in Middle Eastern Sufism, and occasionally they would refer to South Asia. South Asia was not the epicenter of research that was being carried out by transatlantic West. This is very much important. Now, what was the motivation? Why these people from transatlantic West should show interest in Sufism? Now, you have to understand that you have to approach Sufism in terms of a paradox. Sufism believe in one God. It's a monotheistic religion that you have to understand. We may not have the time to differentiate or compare Sufism with Bhakti movement. Shaguna Bhakti movement put emphasis on incarnation, put emphasis on certain aspects which cannot be shared by monotheists. So their Shaguna Bhakti movement is quite different from Sufism, but we do not offer any comparative perspective today because of the time constraint. So you will find that there's a paradox. What is the paradox? That the Sufism is based on monotheistic principles, but the symbols the Sufis are using, the symbols are carrying dual meanings. Though they are putting emphasis on one God, belief in one God, but the symbols associated with Sufism carried or would be carrying dual meanings. This is the interesting aspect. So the Orientalists were interested in one such symbol, that you can say the turban. The turban had dual purpose. One turban was used. Turban means pagri, dastur bandi, or the tying of the turban. One turban was used by the Turkish army, Ottoman army. The transatlantic scholars were not interested in that turban because there was a time in the medieval period when the Turkish army created havoc on the European soil because they were very powerful. So the Orientalists were not interested in the Turkish military turban, but they were interested in another form of turban, that is the mystical turban used by the Sufis. Even today, you know, the Mevlevi Darwish, who would be the present version of the Rumiite Dervishes, they dance anti-clockwise and they wear a sort of an long elongated turban. That is very significant. I am going to explain. So the Orientalists were interested in that mystical turban. Now, why they were so much interested in the turban? We have to address such queries because what was the motive force in the West? You know, a motive force to explore the uh, unexplored, so-called unexplored, at least from the Western perspective, unexplored Oriental world. There was a motive factor, that is the motivational force. What was that? That was based on a Latin term, that is terra australis incognita. Terra australis incognita, or unknown land of the East. Unknown land of the East had to be explored, had to be defined, had to be classified. And who had the right? Who had the legitimate right to define or classify or categorize the unknown land of the East? The Orientalist thought. Because you know, the Orientalist is a non-Oriental scholar, is a white scholar who thinks that it is his legitimate right to define and classify and also categorize the Oriental world, unexplored or least explored Orientalist world. So terra australis incognita, unknown land of the East, would be explored by the Orientalists. So they found that it would be an exciting academic journey if they approached the turban used by the mystics In this way, the Orientalists, the Atlantic Western scholars try to exoticize the Oriental world, mystify the Orientalist world. So it was a sort of excitement, a sort of academic adventurism on the part of um, Orientalists representing the transatlantic West, that you have to understand. Now, later on, as E.H. Carr would say that a scholar is not an island, a historian is not an island, he is very much influenced by contemporary developments. We see that South Asian historians showed interest in Sufism. They had an entirely different perspective, different purpose. Their motive force was quite different from their transatlantic predecessors, that you have to understand, because the nationalist scholars, for example, those who were not activists, political activists, but they were more or less influenced by the nationalist movement, anti-colonial struggle launched on the South Asian soil against the mighty British. So these scholars could be um, Rizvi, Soyod Athar Abbas Rizvi. These scholars could be K.N. Nizami, the great Allegorian historian. Rizvi, once upon a time, was an Allegorian as well. Rizvi, Nizami, and various others who were not directly associated or with any political program, but they were influenced by this nationalist movement, like the great historian Satish Chandra, who was for some time Allegorian as well. So these scholars, because they were very much shocked to see the vivisection of South Asia, partition of South Asia. Our independence was characterized by this bloody partition. So they were trying to explore harmonizing forces from the past. And you have named, rightly, you have named your society the voyages into the past. So these people thought that they would explore the past in terms of its harmonizing potentiality, and they found that Sufi movement or Bhakti movement were institutions which played a syncretizing role so far as South Asian past is concerned, and that would be helpful to maintain the integrity of India, because there was already a vivisection of India. India was divided, India was partitioned, so this was the memory of independence. So that process should be halted by carrying out research on harmonizing forces, on syncretizing forces through which they would be able to challenge the two nation theory that was being represented by Muslim League and staff, and also the divide and rule policy that was being represented by the British. So in this way, they made it their mission to explore the harmonizing forces from India's past, so that India's unity can be maintained. Further balkanization process can be halted by carrying out research on the harmonizing elements, composite cultural pluralistic elements in Indian society, and they found Bhakti and Sufi movement were such movements which will bolster these syncretizing elements in Indian society and culture. So this is the thing. And later on, the Marxists were also not fundamentally different from their nationalist predecessors. They thought that it is very important for the Marxist historians or leftist historians as well to maintain the integrity of South Asia, to challenge the separatism or the two nation theory of the Muslim League, and also to put emphasis on the harmonizing elements in Indian society. Communal harmony became one of their driving force, motivational force. So this is important. So you will find something in common between the nationalist historians and Marxist historians. They all try to mythologize India's past, stereotype Indian past. Why? Because they just as an axiomatic truth, they found that Sufi movement was one such movement which will bolster the harmonizing process in Indian society. That is very much important. But in doing that, there's nothing wrong in doing that, because India definitely had challenges in the immediate aftermath of partition, in the immediate aftermath of independence. But in doing that, they often ignore the complexities associated with such movements like the Sufi movement, such institutions like Sufism. They ignored the complexities associated with Sufism, because complexities, discussing or carrying out research on the complexities also involved or also implied that many critical controversial issues will surface. They wanted to avoid such critical or controversial issues, because they were all said to put emphasis on the harmonizing forces of Indian history. That you have to understand. And if you just carefully study who played a pioneering role, either nationalist or Marxist historians, to carry out research on the Sufism with emphasis on the harmonizing role of the Sufis, you will definitively notice that this sort of research were being carried out in the central universities, because in the central universities during the rudimentary stage, there was an emphasis on research projects which will put emphasis on the harmonizing aspect of Indian society and culture. So if you can confirm that Indian society is based on the notion of pluralistic culture, composite culture, harmonizing nature of Indian culture, if it is emphasized in your research findings, then your research grant is likely to be renewed. Though this research grant in those days had been extremely meager, but that was very honorific to receive such grants from the central government. So you will find that up till the 1960s, that mainly the scholars from central universities played a pioneering role, played a very crucial role. So far as research on Sufism is concerned, and we noticed certain changes from the 1970s. We have mentioned that earlier scholars were not very much interested in incorporating the complexities associated with Sufism. But in the 1970s, something happened in Indian history, internally as well as externally. Internally, the 5-year projects were moving from strength to strength. India was a more self-confident country, not very undecided about its future, as it happened in the aftermath of bloody partition, in the aftermath of independence. Now India is a mature country, a mature democracy, or at least moving towards that sort of a maturity contemplated by the predecessors. So under such circumstances, in the internal history, you see the launching of 5-year plans, which had been moving from strength to strength, as we have already mentioned. In the external case, you see India won several major battles against the neighboring countries and became a very self-confident nation, and was not unsure about its future or present. Under such circumstances, not only the politicians but also the academics felt that we can look back at our past, we can we can undertake a voyage into the past in a more critical manner, and we can, under such circumstances, incorporate complexities so far as study of Sufism or Bhakti movement is concerned. So in the 1970s, we noticed such change, and again, I would like to I would like to share with you that in the 1970s also we see that a focus is shifting, historiographical focus is shifting from Atlantic West to transatlantic West. That is the new world. America is showing interest in Indian mysticism, in Indian Sufism and stuff. So that's why I can clearly mention Richard Eaton is one such personality who would be showing interest in Indian Sufism, and he is definitively not representing the Atlantic West. He is representing the transatlantic West. So, and he was not receiving fund from the Indian government. He was receiving fund from America. So he was working under no obsession or compulsion to put emphasis on the harmonizing forces of Indian history. So he could afford to be very critical, and he could afford to incorporate the complexities associated with the movement we call Sufi movement. So this is very much important. This we should keep at the back of our mind. And again, you will notice major shifts so far as research on Sufism is concerned. That is in the 80s. This time, again, you will notice transatlantic West is showing some interest in South Asian Sufism. But you have to understand that this transatlantic West is not exclusively represented by white American scholars. Sometimes previously Indian scholars who migrated to the West would be showing interest in such research, like Muzaffar Alam, who is an Indian and migrated to Chicago and carried out research on this aspect. And just follow the title of the department, follow the name of the department. It is not the history department where Muzaffar Alam is still working or Dipesh Chakraborty is still working. It is the Center of South Asian Languages and Civilizations. Department of South Asian Languages and Civilizations. So it is not a history department. The very name nomenclature of the department confirms that this is based on the collaboration of a multidisciplinary approach to South Asian history. You will find historians here, you will find theologians here, you will find anthropologists here, you will find literary personalities here, all working on South Asia. So development of South Asian languages and civilizations, not necessarily history department. So there's a multidisciplinary collaborative approach to South Asian studies. This is very crucial. So I'm saying all this because you will understand the various shifts so far as historiography on South Asian Sufism is concerned, and why these people are, again, particularly transatlantic west, is so much interested in South Asian Sufism, because by showing their interest in South Asian Sufism, they demonstrated that South Asia is not the periphery so far as research on Islam or Sufism is concerned. South Asia in its own right is the epicenter of research on Islam, is the epicenter of research on Sufism or mysticism, Islamic mysticism. There are similar approaches masterminded by Chicago. Like you will find scholars like Clifford Geertz, who picked up not Middle East. He is an anthropologist, as I've already indicated, that it's a multidisciplinary approach to South Asian Sufism or Asian Sufism. Clifford Geertz is carrying out research not on the Middle East but on Indonesia. So areas, geocultural regions which are being picked up, they are geographically distanced from the Middle Eastern region or Central Asian region. So that is what is to say is that these regions were not the birthplace of Sufism, but Sufism at one point of time flourished in these regions. And while flourishing in these regions like Indonesia or South Asia, Sufism incorporated many local elements. That is very much crucial for a proper understanding of Sufism. And what happened, today, Sufism has disappeared in the place of its origin, like Middle East or Central Asia or even Northern Africa. But Sufism is flourishing in the so-called peripheral region like Indonesia or South Asia. This is one important dimension which you can understand, because you will understand certain developments even in the 21st century world if you remain careful, familiarized with certain such shifts which took place in the research on Sufism. So this is very much important. I wanted to share that with you. And with such shifts, we notice another thing, that the nationalist and Marxist historians put emphasis on the syncretizing elements of Sufism, harmonizing elements of Sufism, and in doing that, they tried to stereotype the institution called Sufism. But later scholars, as have already indicated, why they were no longer interested in that sort of a study, stereotype study. Mythologization of the past was not their goal. They wanted to study the past. They wanted to undertake a voyage into the past with all its complexities. So that was their challenge, and that was their adventurism, academic adventurism. And they came to a conclusion that syncretism was definitively there in Sufism. Syncretism was definitively there in the Bhakti movement, but at one point of time, Sufi movement was also characterized by not exclusively or unalloyed syncretism, but it was also influenced by competitive spirituality, just like any other religious movement. Competitive spirituality. So this is very much important, these sort of terms, and these sort of scholars also um, included the transatlantic west, and as I've indicated, not only historians, those who have studied literature, South Asian literature, like Tony Stewart, like Tony Stewart's guru, Edward C. Dimmock. They all just studied Sanskrit or Bengali or other languages in South Asia. They also approached Sufism from a very literary perspective, and they put emphasis on the very Tatshama Shabdo, and try to highlight the hermeneutic motif that influenced the scholars, Sufi scholars of South Asia. So this is an important finding, this application of hermeneutic model so far as research on South Asian Sufism is concerned. So far I have discussed the very briefly though the historiographical dimension of Sufism, and now I will try to justify. I will try to justify my argument, that is my hypothesis, which I have so far shared with you, by demonstrating or by offering some illustrations, because history remains incomplete if you fail to provide just references or fail to provide examples or illustrations, because that is the responsibility of the historians. Unlike the literary personalities or other branches of social sciences, we are obsessed with this fact that you have to, at the end of the day, cite examples to um, bolster your argument, to bolster your hypothesis, which you have shared in the initial phase of your discourse. That I'm going to do now. For example, uh, while stereotyping Sufism, the scholars have mentioned, particularly the earlier scholars, the nationalist and Marxist historians, they try to put emphasis, they try to homogenize the Sufi movement. I have mentioned that they ignored the complexities of the Sufi movement. They were not that interested in the heterogeneous aspect of Sufism, because they thought that they will feel uncomfortable if they studied the heterogeneous elements within Sufism, particularly when India was facing the challenge of nation building in the aftermath of vivisection, bloody vivisection. Then, under such circumstances, it's better to homogenize movement, or to mythologize the Sufi movement as a harmonizing element. But and while doing that, they found it easy to pick up examples from the Chisti Sufis, because almost unarguably the Chistis were the most liberal and syncretizing Sufi silsilas of South Asia. And again, it is easier to prove that the Mughals were very close to the Chistis. As you know, Selim Chisti was very close to Akbar. And Akbar had Jahangir. Akbar believed because of the blessing of Selim Chisti. I'm just giving you one example. And once upon a time, even Jahanara, the beloved daughter of Shah Jahan, also wrote a manuscript in honor of venerating Moinuddin Chisti of Ajmer, who was the doyen Chisti Sufi of South Asia. So I could have carried on, but I think these two examples would suffice, that the Mughals were very close to the Chistis. So that's why the nationalist and Marxist historians thought, like Sayyid Nurul Hasan, the governor historian of Bengal, as you know, in the 20th century, late 20th century, they believe, they put emphasis on this Mughal state, who had been very close to the Chisti Sufis. So what we find in this sort of a gesture, there's a Chisti-centric approach to research. Chistis, they were obsessed with the Chistis. They were obsessed with the Mughals. They were obsessed with the North Indian Sufism. Though Rizvi, a nationalist historian, Rizvi's book, title of his book is A History of Sufism in India. Virtually, this is not the history of the entire India. This is the history of northern India, because you will find that he is mainly sharing with you the characteristic features of Sufism that flourished in northern India. So a North India centric approach, a Mughal centric approach, characterize the works of these nationalist historians, and to some extent the Marxist historians, because they were the integrationist historians. They had integration as a challenge. Integration was in their mind, and naturally so, because in the aftermath of partition, that was the prime concern of the historians, of the academics, in the aftermath of partition and the aftermath of independence. So they had a all India perspective. They had an all India perspective. So this is very much important. But if you look at the title of Richard Eaton's book, the Transatlantic Intervention in Sufism, if you carefully follow the title, for example, Sufis of Bijapur, the term India is missing here, unlike Rizvi's book, or unlike the governor historian Sayyid Nurul Hasan's book, unlike Satish Chandra's book. You will find that the name India, that India is missing in the title. So Sufis of Bijapur. Bijapur is a region. This is appearing in 1978. That is, he was carrying out his research throughout 1970s, which confirms my hypothesis that there's a major shift in research relating to Sufism in South Asia. Richard Eaton is the transatlantic Western brain who is representing this change. And then in the early 90s, Richard Eaton would be writing another major work, another major book. This time it is Rise of Islam and the Bengal Frontier. And again, India is missing. So Bengal is focused here. Bengal is another region. So Richard Eaton is consistent in his focus on the region so far as research on Islam or Sufism is concerned. So we notice another major shift from the all India perspective, from the North India perspective, from a Chisti-centric perspective to regional perspective. This is very much important to remember. And when you move to the region, you are in a better position to discuss the heterogeneous nature of Sufism. You are in a better equipped to discuss the complexities of the Sufi movement, which our predecessors have failed to do or did not intend to do. This is very much important. And my humble hypothesis is that if you study this under-researched Silsila Qadriya, they would be faring very well, and they will not be lagging behind their Chishti counterparts. And the Chistis are very much highlighted by our academic predecessors, as I have already discussed that with you. So, in support of my hypothesis, I would say that these Qadriyas were very intriguing people. Not only the Chistis, who were very liberal in their attitude, the Qadris sometimes were very liberal in their attitude. They sometimes opposed music, but that does not mean that they were exclusively orthodox or conservatives. Chistis were in favor of music. I will have occasions to discuss this aspect of music very soon. What is the implication of this proclivity towards or inclination towards music, that will be explained by me very soon. So the Kadris showed interest in Vedas and Upanishads. So they were very intriguing people. Just because they were opposed to music, you cannot just jump to this conclusion that they were very orthodox Sufis and not worthy to be studied. This is my hypothesis. They are under researched. There should be more research coming up on the Qadri Sufis for a proper understanding of Sufism in the South Asian context with all its complexities. That is my submission. And you cannot forget that Akbar is credited with the implementation of Sulle Kul, that is the peace with all, but Akbar was not the originator of Sulle Kul. Akbar did not just introduce Sulle Kul. You have to understand that he just borrowed that from the Qadri Sufis, that is peace with all religious beliefs and practices, that was being experimented by the Qadris. Akbar, in a more efficient and rigorous manner, translated that theology into practice. That is true, but he was not the inventor of Sulle Kul, that you have to recognize. And this Qadri has played a very crucial role in that respect. And they studied Vedas and Upanishads that confirm their liberal bent of mind, inclusive bent of mind. And that's why what is the job of a scholar? Actually, it is our job to just join the dots. And if you carry on joining the dots, you will find that the Qadris were interested in Vedas and Upanishads centuries before the birth of Darashuko, the ill-fated Mughal prince. But this Mughal prince translated 58 Upanishads. There are 108 Upanishads, as you know, but Darashuko translated only 58 Upanishads, major Upanishads. Actually, Darashuko was inspired by the Qadris because his initial Murshid or initial guru was a Qadri Sufi. So these linkages are very important. Darashuko was motivated by the Qadris. So Darashuko was not working independently. You have to understand personalities like Darashuko in terms of their entanglements with various forces, like what was the Chistis or what were the Qadris were doing during his time. And you can explore under such circumstances that why Darashuko was motivated to translate the Upanishad from Sanskrit into Persian. He learned Sanskrit and was well versed in Persian, as you know. So that version is known as Sirri Akbar, the Great Mystery. And again, I started by saying that how the Oriental scholar tried to exoticize the Oriental world. And here you will find this Darashuko, who had a Sufic bent of mind, was also trying to explore the mystery, just like a Sufi traveler or salik. A spiritual traveler in Sufism is called a salik. So he was a salik who was an eternal traveler and was trying to explore the mystery associated with Sufism. That is the goal of a Sufi, to explore the mystery, to divulge the mystical truth, or at least to move towards that mystical truth. That is the prime motivation behind the journey of a salik. So this ambulatory salik undertakes such a journey. Darashuko was no exception. So it is quite natural that he would be titling his title of his work or translation of the Upanishad would be Sirri Akbar, the great mystery, as if he was all set to explore, to divulge the great mystery, the great mystical truth. That is very much important. Now, often the nationalist and the Marxist historians have denounced the Naqshbandi Sufis. They did not consider the Naqshbandis as someone or a silsila worthy to be studied, because there was a Naqshbandi reaction against the Akbarite rule, and Akbar is the favorite of the nationalist and Marxist historians, just like Samrat Ashoka, Emperor Ashoka is the favorite of many historians, who was very liberal, very tolerant, and anticipated a very pluralistic India and such. So Akbar was something like that, an ideal ruler like Ashoka, who represent the medieval period. If Ashoka represented the ancient period, Akbar represented the medieval period. So those who try to justify the harmonizing nature of Indian culture, pluralistic nature of Indian culture, they put emphasis on Ashoka or Akbar the Great. So uh, Akbar had a very uneasy relationship with the Naqshbandis, and that prompted many uh, left or nationalist historians to denounce the Naqshbandis as orthodox Sufi silsilas. But this sort of a denunciation of the Naqshbandis is a very facile step. This is very one-sided decision on the part of some historians. I just suggested that Sufism or each and every silsila should be studied with all its complexities. It's a multi-layered, heterogeneous movement. You cannot just denounce one silsila as orthodox and can just celebrate another silsila as liberal. The story is not just black and white. There are gray areas which, as students of history, you should be responsible to explore. So the Naqshbandis are denounced on this ground that they represented a reaction against Akbar's liberal policy, so they can be denounced as an orthodox sect. And again, they further bolstered their argument regarding the denunciation of the Naqshbandis by saying that the Naqshbandis were opposed to music, unlike the Chistis. So their opposition to to music confirmed their orthodox position in the history of Sufism. So in this way, it became easier for the nationalist and Marxist historians to denounce the Naqshbandis so far as research on Sufism is concerned. But my humble submission today is that you cannot just stereotype the Naqshbandis. It's a very complex study so far as Sufism in the South Asian context is concerned. Just in support of my hypothesis, I would say that they did not always denounce music. They did not always discard music. Their attitude towards music is situational. You have to understand that their attitude towards music is situational. On one occasion, they denounced music should not prompt you to jump to the conclusion that the Naqshbandis were orthodox, that look, that they have denounced music. This is not an eternal decision, exhaustive decision on the part of the Naqshbandis. They can behave in an entirely different manner when they are functioning in a different geocultural region. This is the adaptability of the Sufis. This is the improvising nature of the Sufis that you have to keep at the back of your mind when you are trying to analyze the Sufi movement, either in the South Asian context or beyond. For example, uh, we had been discussing with Shombit and also Aditya, that their teacher is Dr. Soumen Mukherjee, a former student, brilliant student of mine in Calcutta University. Showman carried out his research in Heidelberg in Germany. So a long time ago, I had the opportunity in 2006. I had the opportunity to carry out some postdoctoral research in Heidelberg, in Germany, and I had some German students. Once in the evening, they came and they said that the Naqshbandis in Germany are organizing a sama, that is Sufi musical concert, and whether I was interested to listen to that sama. I said, of course, I will be going there. So I went there and I found that the Naqshbandis definitively organized a Sufi musical concert. So how can you say that under all circumstances the Naqshbandis would denounce Sama or Sufi musical concert? That is not the case. In the European situation, they can behave in a very different way. In the American situation, they can behave in a very different way. I later on asked them that why in the subcontinent you denounce music, but why you are celebrating music in the European context, in the Western context. Answer was very interesting, very improvising answer, very clever answer full of wisdom. They said that if you do that is if you denounce music in the Western situation, the young generation will not be attracted to your movement. So this was the adjustment. And you may ask me this question, whether this adjustment was in conformity with the theological position taken by the Naqshbandis. Definitely it was in conformity with the theological position taken by the Naqshbandis. So I visited that summer musical concert in Heidelberg, Germany, and I noticed in that evening that their musical concert is fundamentally different from the musical concert that would be sponsored by the Chisti Sufis of South Asia. You can recollect Damadam Maskalandar, Alida, Paila Number, etc. etc. These sort of things will never be uttered by by the Naqshbandis. This is the privilege of the Chistis. This characterize the Chisti Sama. The Chistis extrapolate, they imagine. The imaginaire Muslim would be at work when you attend a Chisti Sama in the subcontinent. But when you attend a Naqshbandi Sama beyond South Asia, because they are very uncomfortable in hosting Sama in the South Asian context, as I have already indicated. But if you happen to take part in Naqshbandi Sama in places beyond South Asia, you will notice that this their Sama is fundamentally different from the Chisti Sama, because each and every, I also noticed on that evening, on that very memorable evening in my life, that the Naqshbandis selected each and every word either from the Quran or from the Hadith. There was not a single imagination, single storytelling, or not even a single word that had been selected beyond the Quran and the Hadith. So within the very religious framework, the Naqshbandis would perform sama or musical concert. So they will not indulge in fabrication, not indulge in imagination, improvisation, as to that extent where, if, for example, in Chisti Sama, you will find that Mirabai is not longing to be united with Krishna. Mirabai is longing to be united with Moinuddin Chisti of Ajmer, because Moinuddin Chisti of Ajmer is situated in Rajasthan, and Mirabai is also from Rajasthan. So Mirabai, in the fertile imagination of the Chisti Qawwali composer, is longing to be united with Moinuddin Chisti, Khaja Garib Nawaz, and not with Krishna. So this sort of the imaginaire the poet, he will discover among the Chistis, but he will never discover such an initiative, an enterprise among the Naqshbandis. Each and every story they would select would be either from the Quran or from the Hadith. And not only the stories, but even each and word they would be selecting, that would be either from the Quran or from the Hadith. This is very much important, and that distinguishes Naqshbandi Sama from the Chisti musical concert. That uh, these sort of complexities were not studied by our predecessors, like the nationalist and Marxist historians. But nowadays, so far as research on Sufism is concerned, these dimensions are again and again being incorporated in the studies. And again, I cannot resist the temptation of citing another example. In the 18th century context, when you see Mughal degeneration, the degeneration of the empire, and the empire is a political institution. When you see the dissolution of the political institution, when the void created by the dissolution of the political institution, that void was being filled up by the Naqshbandi theoreticians or theologians. This is very crucial, and this is an under-researched area so far as South Asian historiography is concerned. That is my humble submission once again. I will just give you one example, because I notice that time is running out for me. I have to discuss so many things. So under such circumstances, I will just cite one example, that in the 18th century, you say that there is degeneration, but there is not total degeneration. There was thus just a new type of vibrance so far as Naqshbandi movement is concerned. So when there was a political void, there was a theological uh, upsurge, theological resurgence so far as the Naqshbandis are concerned. So it's not a story of degeneration or decline for every institution. It was also a story of redefinition for certain institutions, like the institution of Naqshbandi Sufism centering around Delhi. For example, there was one very famous Naqshbandi Sufi, Mirza Mazar Jani Janan. Mirza Mazar Jani Janan practiced, applied something which is remarkable in the 18th century context. What is that? He coined a term that is very popular among the Naqshbandis, that is Tasawwur Sheikh, that is called Tasawwur. Tasveer is the portrait of someone. So that's from Tasveer you have Tasawwur. Tasawwur Sheikh. Sheikh means Sufi saint. So tasawwuri sheikh means that you are, while you are imagining the face of your murshid or your guide, spiritual guide. This is the understanding. So very enthusiastic followers of Mirza Mazar Jani Janan, a very famous 18th century Naqshbandi Sufi of Delhi. His very enthusiastic Muslim followers said that, why don't you convert your Hindu followers? He had both Hindu and Muslim followers. So why don't you convert your Hindu followers? They are idolaters and they should be converted into Islam. This was the This was the conclusion of some of his very enthusiastic or rather over enthusiastic Muslim followers. Then what was the response of Mirza Mazar Jani Janan? Look at the response. So Mirza Mazar Jani Janan had the wisdom to understand that this was the period of Mughal decline, and Mughal decline implied that patronage will also disappear. So far as the sustenance of the Naqshbandis are concerned, they will no longer be receiving the patronage of a powerful empire because the empire itself was in a declining phase. Under such circumstances, what was the alternative? How the void could be filled up? So he was thinking about that. And under such circumstances, when there was no patronage possible from the empire, declining, degenerating empire, he was thinking about a Hindu Muslim rapprochement so that they can encounter that crisis of the 18th century. So, under such circumstances, he had his projects. He tried to translate into practice some of the practices of the Naqshbandis, which assume new meaning in the 18th century context of decline, degeneration, and crisis. So this is very much important. So what was his suggestion? He said, no, we shall carry out one experimentation. You are saying, my Muslim followers are saying that why don't I convert my Hindu disciples? I Let us do some experimentation. He asked all the Muslim enthusiastic followers in a room, and that was a very common Sufi practice. And he asked them to think about religion. They started to think about religion, and he said, then you close your eyes. They closed their eyes, and after some time they opened their eyes, and he asked that did you see anything when you started to think about religion? And all of them responded by saying that when we at the moment we started to think about religion, your very sacred pious face appeared in our imagination. Then the wise Sufi Mirza Mazar Jani Janan instantly responded by saying that then you are all idolaters, because when you are thinking, being a representative of monotheistic religion, when you are supposed to think about religion, you are not supposed to think about any human face. So then you are all idolaters. So if I do not convert you fast, then how can I afford to convert my Hindu followers? So there is no necessity. It's not necessary to convert my Hindu followers. Let them what they are. They can just be a part of our movement. So this was the dialogue, interfaith dialogue, that was being sustained by the Naqshbandis in the 18th century context. This is an under-researched area. We have very easily just denounced the Naqshbandis as orthodox elements. We never studied the Naqshbandis played a very harmonious role in South Asian context. So in this way, we can carry on challenging some of the stereotypes shared by our academic predecessors who carried out research on Sufism, particularly the nationalist and Marxist historians. So this is one important dimension that you have to remember. Another thing is that you have to understand that uh, by studying only royal sources, courtly sources left behind by court historians, you cannot reconstruct the socio-cultural past. You are an important institution of young people, very young people. I'm very impressed by your mode of functioning, because we are living in an in an era when people are no longer interested in this sort of serious studies. But you, like Shambhid and Aditya, you have asked me to share my views on very serious topic like Sufism, and that's why in your voyages into the past, it is very important to study that you cannot reconstruct the past by exclusively relying on court histories left behind by court historians who were sponsored by great emperors. But if you have to study, if you have to chronicle the everyday life, the everyday emotions, aspirations, and also the frustrations of the common people, you have to consult uh, unconventional sources, sources which were not sponsored by great emperors, such as unconventional sources such as poetry and music left behind by the Sufis, like maktubat, letters exchanged between Sufi saints, like malfuzat, that is the table talk involving the Sufi saints, like tazkira, or the biographies of the Sufi saints. These sort of sources are replete with examples of everyday society, everyday life of the common people. But the royal historians were mainly engrossed with the life of the exceptional people, like the royalty, like the nobility, etc. But this time, you can spill over to the lives of common people, their everyday lives had been encapsulated in these sort of unconventional sources. So these were written in Persian, but these Sufis were also prepared to interact more and more with the common people in the vernacular language. That's why this is the interesting dimension. So they were the intellectually they were the amphibians, the amphibious people. In a sense, this is the term I'm using for your convenience, because they maintained a linkage between the classical and the non-classical, the classical and the popular. When they wanted to outreach towards the reach the people, common people, then they relied on vernacular languages. That's why it is not surprising that Nizamuddin Aulia is instructing his disciple Amir Khusru, the doyen of Indian Qawwali, that you should converse more in the local Purvi dialect with the local people. So this is the recognition of the vernacular language, recognition of the vernacular language and the local language. This is also a recognition of the identity formation process of the common people. The Sufis were in this way were not exclusively elitist. They were very humane. They were spiritual. They were liberal, broad-minded, inclusive. They were prepared to incorporate, or at least they were prepared to spill over to the everyday life of the common people. So this is very important role played by the Sufis in medieval India. Another dimension you may ask, that why Sufism disappeared in the North African countries, and also in the Middle East or Central Asia, but it is still thriving in South Asia. There should be an answer to that. I should be prepared to respond to such a query, and I have a humble submission to safeguard my position. I will fortify my position. I would say that in India, one doctrine, Sufi doctrine, became very popular. That the Spanish Sufi Ibn al-Arabi's doctrine of Wadatul Wajud, that is, everything is he, God is reflected in everything, hama ust, that is, God is reflected in everything. If God is reflected in everything, God is also reflected in a non-Muslim. So how can you denounce a non-Muslim as a kafir? So in this way, there was an approach there was an attempt to incorporate people from different walks of life, people from different faith zones and stuff. So this was a liberal, broad-minded, inclusive, rational attitude, pragmatic attitude of the Sufis, who believed in a harmonious society, in interfaith dialogue. So in a pluralistic society, in a composite culture, that was very contextual, that was very appropriate for the Indian situation. So that's why Sufism could adjust with local circumstances. But Sufism could not maintain its uniqueness in Central Asia, Middle East, or even in North Africa, because they could not maintain their distinct identity in these regions. This is my analysis of the problem regarding their dissolution in North Africa or Middle East. They followed another doctrine. That doctrine is based on a little bit exclusivism or differentiation among different faith zones. This is very much important. I'm not elaborating because time is running out for me. I'm supposed to just wind up now. So just I'm giving you example during the interactions I may have the opportunity to refer to this. So in Northern Africa and Middle East or Central Asia, we notice that the Sufis projected a doctrine that was not inclusive, that was exclusive. So they failed to maintain a separate, distinct identity as compared to hegemonic orthodoxy. They became dissolved in hegemonic orthodoxy. They could not maintain a separate identity as compared with the representatives of hegemonic orthodoxy in West Asia or Northern Africa. But that did not happen with the Sufis in South Asia. They were able to maintain a distinct, separate identity as compared to hegemonic orthodoxy in this part of the world. That's why Sufism is still flourishing. That is very important to remember. I will just wind up um, by highlighting certain aspects, because uh, while studying Sufism, you also what has been ignored by our predecessors, academic predecessors, like the nationalists and the Marxist historians, is that uh, I've already indicated that they have ignored the complexities. Why I have also shared with that with you. Now, but you should not follow, emulate them, your predecessors. You may be enriched by their works, but you have to move forward so far as your understanding of Sufism or similar movements are concerned. Uh, you have to study these sort of mystical movements in terms of a subtle tension between the provincial or regional symbols of religion and the universal symbols of religion. This is an area mainly untouched, left untouched by our Marxist and nationalist predecessors. I will give you just one example because of the time constraint. For example, Murshid or the Guru is a local symbol. Someone who is a Guru in Chittagong will not be a Guru in Central Asia or West Asia. You can understand that. He is a local peer, provincial peer. So he is the symbol of local identity formation. He is the symbol of local religion. He is the symbol of local Islam, popular Islam. But there are universal symbols also within Islam, like the Quran, like the Hadith, like Allah, like Khalifa, and so on. So there is a subtle tension going on between the universal symbols of Islam and the local symbols of Islam. Why I'm saying that you need to understand this subtle tension in terms of the changes within society, economy, and polity, because unless you do this exercise, you are not able to understand the nuances of the identity formation process of the local community. That is very much important. So, for example, if you have to study the identity formation process of the Bengali speaking Muslims, you will not be able to do that. Why Bengali speaking Muslims oppose the Pakistani regime who were also Muslims? You understand that only when you understand their attitude towards the local symbol of religion. Uh, that will enable you to understand the nuances of identity formation within the local community, and that will make clear before you how they were different from the Pakistani Muslims. The Bengali speaking Muslims were different from Pakistani Muslims. This is very much important. That's why scholars are using terms like Islams or Muslims, S with one S, because um, South Asian Islam is not similar to West Asian Islam. It's different. It has different characteristic features. So this is the task of a social scientist, uh, that you have to understand. For example, uh, you have to understand that in the poetry of Jami or Rumi, Prophet Muhammad in the folk poems of the Arab world or the Persianate world appears as the camel driver, because these are the desert regions. Desert regions. So environment also plays a very significant role when you study Sufism. But in Bengal, you don't have desert. In Bengal, you don't have desert. It's riverine Bengal. So their camel driver prophet in the imagination of the Sufis is replaced by Sujan Kandari, or the boatman prophet. Uh, so I will just before winding up, I will just highlight this aspect, and will just conclude very quickly. I will just show you. Just you have to tell me. I will show you some Persian scripts. Is my handwriting. I will show you certain things which will make things a little bit interesting for you. But you just tell me whether you can see, because I'm not using the PowerPoint. But if you can see, you tell me that you can see, and it will be easier. I have divided the couplets into four categories: A, B, C, and D. Just let me know whether you can see. I'm just uh, focusing my mobile on that scripture. Can you see? Can you see, Aditya or Shombit? I think you can see. Okay, so A, B, C, D. These are some of the uh, couplets from the Persian texts that I have mentioned earlier. These are very important. Symbol is very important. Perhaps you could see. Um, so here, I just before winding up, when there was a question put before Nizamuddin Aulia, the most illustrious Chishti Sufi saint of South Asia. that what should be the position of women in Sufi society. Nizamuddin Aulia allegorically responded. I will keep you thinking why the Sufis would be thinking allegorically. They indirectly responded to certain important questions which they faced in society, in contemporary society. They would not provide direct responses, direct answers. Indirectly responded to certain queries. You have to think why. So I will keep you thinking. This is a very thinking topic. Then Nizamuddin responded by saying that what should be the position of women in society? He responded by saying that when a lioness, I'm avoiding the Persian quotation because of the time constraint. Uh, when a lioness emerges from the forest, no one raises any question about her sex because the primary concern of that human being at that moment is his personal safety or security. And that is true. When you face a lion or a lioness near the forest, then you don't carry out any research whether that is a male or a female, because actually in the lion society, the lions are parasitical. The principal predator is a lioness, so lioness is often more dangerous than the lion. So Nizamuddin Aulia is conveying a message to the larger society by putting emphasis on this term lioness, that is, women can possess spiritual knowledge under such circumstances. Women can be elevated in the spiritual hierarchy just like any male murshid or male guru. So this was the indication. This was the liberal attitude cherished by certain Sufis towards the towards women in society. You can understand the implication of such things. Uh, I will just wind up by saying what are our concluding remarks today. We have seen that because village situation is very important. Bengali Islam cannot be imagined. I have mentioned boatman prophet Sujon Kandari. You cannot exclude rural Islam if you have to imagine, contemplate South Asian Islam, because Bengali speaking Muslims constitute one of the largest Muslim communities in the world to have an agrarian base. Indonesian Muslims constitute one of the largest Muslims in the world, Muslim communities in the world to have an agrarian base. So our first conclusion is that Islam is not necessarily an urban religion. It can flourish with all its vitality even in a rural setting. Number two, conclusion number two, heterogeneous and complex nature of the Sufi movement in South Asia should be taken into consideration, that we have all through discussed. Number three, a multidisciplinary approach involving the historians, anthropologists, and sociologists would be useful in such research, that we have again and again emphasized, reiterated. Gender discourse in India did not start in the 19th century, that we have indicated, that even as far as early as Nizamuddin Aulia, as early as the time of Nizamuddin Aulia, we see this discourse on gender in Indian society. Generalizations such as Sufis were afraid of being overwhelmed by Hindu mysticism should be avoided. And last but not the least, Qadriya Silsila still await special attention in the context of India's cultural pluralism. Now, you have listened to me with patience for more than an hour. I am grateful to all of you. I thank all of you. I once again thank Shombit and Aditya for organizing this and giving me the opportunity to speak. And now, if you have any query, I'll be delighted to respond to your query. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for such wonderful lecture. And I am sure those who have attended the session throughout have benefited from this session. And there is some question in the comment box from the audiences. I shall go one by one. The first question is from Shukdev Sohal. He asks, how far has the centrality of Sufism in Iran influenced the shifting of project on Sufism in USA?
Well, I get your first question. Thank you very much for the question. That is actually not within the ambit of our study. I mainly wanted to focus on South and Sufism, but since it's an important question, I will respond to your query. Very important, definitively. You will find that there was an immigration of Iranians to the states. They actually, this is very important in the sense that why did they migrate to the United States? Sometimes they were persecuted in their homeland, that is in Iran. And I personally met some Iranians who also migrated to India, being persecuted by the representatives of hegemonic orthodoxy. Now, uh, it is very interesting that they articulated the nature of their persecution in Sufic language, because the Sufis always had this perception of being persecuted because they were not the mainstream religion. They had always had to encounter hegemonic orthodoxy, or at least the representatives of hegemonic orthodoxy, and they were persecuted by hegemonic orthodoxy. So those who had to leave Iran, their homeland, for a shelter either in the USA or in India or elsewhere, they try to interpret their nature of persecution, magnitude of persecution in Sufic language, in Sufic terms. This is very common. So in this way, they definitely played a very crucial role in the migration of Sufi ideas to states and other countries. That is very much important. I am thankful to you for raising this question. That's why you will find that under such circumstances, Rumi was reinvented under such circumstances. Rumi became one of the most popular poets. Rumi is an early medieval personality, but he is one of the most popular, of course, translated Rumi, translated into English. Translated Rumi is one of the most popular poets in America. How? The immigrants from the Islamic countries, particularly from Iran, after being persecuted, they found that in an articulate manner they can encounter or respond to the criticism projected by hegemonic orthodoxy through Sufic language. So through a Sufic body language, like the anti-clockwise dance of the Mevlevi Darwish, so popularized by Jalaluddin Rumi in his Masnavi. So in this way, Masnavi was credited to be the first top book, most popular book of poetry in the United States. Of course, the translated version. So in this way, the Mevlevi dance is actually a physical challenge, symbolic challenge to hegemonic orthodoxy. Dance and music, I did not get the chance, but dance and music pose a serious challenge to hegemonic orthodoxy. Gandhi was aware of that, and Gandhi had connections with this Persianate culture. I do not have the time to delve deep into that. Gandhi opted for Persian language in school, and this Persianate culture bolstered Gandhi's attitude towards a hostile attitude towards hegemonic orthodoxy. So when Gandhi was encountering the Muslim League or Hindu Mahasabha, he put emphasis on music, if not on dance entirely. But Rabindranath Tagore or Nazrul Islam, when they challenged hegemonic orthodoxy, they put emphasis on music and dance, as you know. I will not elaborate, but this symbolic challenge to hegemonic orthodoxy through dance and music is very important. And the migrant Iranian population to the states facilitated this sustenance of this tradition, Sufi mystical tradition, by their presence in the states, in the new world. That I admit. Thank you so much. Any other query?
The second question from Rakesh De. The question is, what are the differences and similarities between Sufism and Bhaktism?
This is a long question. There will be a thorough lecture, a 1 hour or 2 hours lecture on this. Recently, I spoke for nearly 3 hours on this in the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture. Actually, Bhakti movement started early in the Indian society, and later on there was interaction between Bhakti and Sufi movement, because in the Sufi Jamaat Khanas, in the Sufi Khankas, that is the Sufi lodges or hospices, we find that there's a convergence of Bhakti and Sufi saints. There's a convergence of yogis and Sufis. So, for example, Nizamuddin Auliya practiced pranayam. So I'm just giving one example. And Bulle Shah of Punjab followed certain yogic and bhakti traditions. So there was definitely interaction, and one thing is common between Bhakti and Sufi movement is that both challenged hegemonic orthodoxy, and both Sufi and Bhakti movement had a close relationship with mercantile activities and urbanization. So these are important entanglements. Both Bhakti and Sufi movement had connections with urbanization, with mercantile activities, and both were opposed to hegemonic state, hegemonic polity, and hegemonic orthodoxy. So, in very briefly, I have responded to your question. Elaboration would imply a 3 hours lecture, but I'm not going into that. But you have to at the same time remember that sometimes Bhakti movement can be fundamentally different from Sufi movement. Both are mystical movements, but remember that many Bhakti saints put emphasis on Shaguna Bhakti, that, and they put emphasis on the notion of incarnation. Incarnation is not acceptable within Sufism. Incarnation concept is not even acceptable within Nirguna Bhakti as projected by Kabir, Guru Nanak, etc. But in Shaguna Bhakti of Chaitanya, Mirabai, and Staff and Tulsidas, you will find Shaguna Bhakti where the concept of incarnation is acceptable. So there is a difference regarding that. And regarding bhakti, it is very interesting. In bhakti movement, a devotee is absolutely at the mercy of the supreme being, absolutely at the mercy of the supreme being. Why? Because even if you are a devout bhakto, whether you will achieve salvation or not depends on the will of God, entirely depends on the prasad or will of God. That's why you will see that Krishna is mentioning the gopis by name while playing the flute, mentioning the gopis by name. If he omitted the name of any particular gopi, that gopi will not achieve salvation. So the name of the gopi had to be chanted by Krishna, who represented God, if the gopi had to gopini had to achieve salvation. But in Sufism, individual initiative, individual endeavor is very much important. That's why I differentiate the devotee within Sufism and devotee within the Bhakti movement as an activist devotee. That is, the activist devotee represents Sufism, and the uh, fortunate or selected devotee in case of Bhakti movement. That's why unless you are selected by God, you will not achieve salvation. But in Sufism, it is clearly mentioned by Mansur Hallaj and many others I have mentioned today, that if you think or chant the name of God, that is echoed in the heart of God as well. So there is an automatic conditional reflex action on the part of God if you express your devotion entirely to God. So an activist devotee is important in Sufism, but a fortunate devotee is predominant in the notion of bhakti. So in this way, you can carry on just drawing the demarcating line between bhakti and Sufi movement. I will stop here regarding the bhakti Sufi comparative study. Because of the time constraint, there could be other questions. Yes, Aditya. Is there any question?
The third question from Piali Sarkar. She asks, how far is Sufism an close ally of Islam? We see saints like Khaja Nizamuddin, Abdul Qadir Jilani, Rumi, Shams, Tabriz, and Ghazali never called themselves as Sufis. As presumed it were the people who labeled them as such, while we also see these saints designated themselves as simple Muslims.
Very good question, Piali Sarkar, for your query. Actually, um, many Orthodox Muslims today will not consider Sufism as an integral part of Islam. That is true. I'm giving only one example. Just maybe 2 or 3 years back, in the month of February, I even remember that date of that infamous day, 4th February. As far as I remember, it's 4th February, first week of February. Several people had been offering their prayer in a mosque in Cairo, and some 300 people had been massacred while they were offering their prayer in a mosque. Now, those who were massacred were Muslims, and those who slaughtered them were Muslims as well. Why? Because these 300 people, they included children, they included women and aged people, these 300 people who were praying in a mosque, they represented mystical Islam or Sufism. They were Sufi oriented. So this was not acceptable to a group of Orthodox Muslims. So they sent the killers to kill them, to massacre them. So you can understand the relationship between Orthodox Islam and Sufism. Many people will carefully maintain distance from Sufism, and that's why I've indicated that in West Asia, Sufism has disappeared. In Northern Africa, Sufism has disappeared, but in India, South Asia, Sufism is flourishing somehow. So that is the case, and it is true that you have to understand there are two perspectives: how you imagine yourself, how you introduce yourself is one thing, but after several centuries of our death, if we are famous, if we are remembered at all, we are imagined in a different way by the posterity. The posterity are often tempted to imagine the past in the context of the present, in the context of their contemporary time. So that is very much crucial. So the posterity wanted to imagine Gilani and others as Sufis because they could explore commonalities between Gilani and Sufi, basic tenets of Sufi practice. So this is the thing. And Nizamuddin Aulia was a Sufi and he did not deny the term, and the very term Aulia actually confirms that he was Nizamuddin Aulia was a Sufi. Aulia is a plural from Wali. Wali means the friend of God. Aulia is an honorific term. That's why pluralistic term, plural term. So he was Nizamuddin Aulia. So there were some people who became famous, became legends during their lifetime, and came to be known as Sufis, or and after death they were celebrated as saints. So, but actually you were right. Jilani, Abdul Qadir Jilani, etc. They were, I would use the term Alim Sufi. Predominantly they were Alims, that is the Molavi, later Sufis. You do not use the term Sufi Alim, you use the term Alim Sufis. So in that sense, they were first exposed to the details of scriptures, and then they developed mystical ideas. Actually, you are right. They were Alim Sufis in the sense that they wanted to bring about a harmony between the Sufis and the representatives of Orthodox Islam. But why? As a student of history, I suppose you are a student of history, you have to perceive the problem from the historical context. When these people were flourishing, there was a tremendous political crisis in West Asia. What was this crisis? That was the Mongol crisis. During that Mongol crisis, these people wanted to bring the orthodox and mystical elements closer to each other so that they can survive. Otherwise, if they carry out a fighting between themselves, internecine warfare will only enlarge the existing hole in the society. They wanted to just fill up that hole by certain things, by wisdom. So in this way, he wanted to create a common platform on which the representatives of orthodoxy and the representatives of mysticism could converge in the context of crisis that was being represented by the advent of the Mongols in West Asian society. So you have to read that crisis in that context. I have already discussed that in that context, in 18th century context of crisis, how Mirza Mazar Jani Janan had been acting. I have already mentioned. Very good question. Thank you. If there is any other question.
There is a question from G. Krishnan. He asks, many have said that there is a connection between Sufism and Bauls. Would you to have your opinion on that?
Very good question, Krishnan. I'm delighted by your question actually. Definitively. The Bauls trace their origin from the Chishti Sufis. Now, why do the Bauls of Bengal trace their origin from the Chishti Sufis? I've mentioned the Chishti Sufis. Chistis are favorably disposed towards music. I've mentioned that there are certain Sufi orders who are not favorably disposed towards music. The Bauls celebrate music and dance, as you know. I did not elaborate here. You might have watched the film by Gautam Ghosh, Moner Manush. You have, and you might have read, translated. I don't know whether you read Bengali. If you don't, you have translated. I have read the translated, I would assume, of translated version of Rabindranath Tagore's Gora. Gora novel is starting with a baul song. খাঁচার ভিতর অচিন পাখি কেমনে আসে যায়, ধরতে পারলে মনো বেরি দিতাম পাখির পায়. This is a baul song, and the novel is starting with this song. And Rabindranath was also inspired by the Sufis and asked, deputized his deputy Kitimon Sen to carry out research on the Sufis. Definitely the Bauls trace their genealogical spiritual origin from the Chisti Sufis, because the Chistis also celebrate music and dance. So does the Bauls, and in this way, this pose a symbolic challenge to hegemonic orthodoxy. Because of their liberal nature, the Chistis are arguably the most popular Sufi silsilas of South Asia. Similarly, because of their liberal, inclusive, music-friendly attitude, the Bauls became very popular. Very few people knew Raja Rammohn Roy, but Raja Rammohn Roy's contemporary was Baul Lalon Shah. Lalon Shah had hundreds of thousands of followers in the Bengal countryside. But Rammohn Roy and Sir Syed Ahmed Khan were known by very few people during their lifetime. So you have to spill over to the countryside. You have to spill over to the mystical elements. So that's why it's very important. And again, I didn't get the time. Fatima, the beloved daughter of Hazrat Muhammad, is very popular among the mystical elements, among the Bauls also. Damaddam Maskalandar Ali da Pahla number. Ali is the husband of Fatima. Ali is the fourth caliph of Islam. Ali is also the symbol of mystical Islam. So mystical Islam is popular in the countryside, and scriptural Islam is popular in the urban pockets. I will leave you thinking why this happens. Anyway, a very good question. I appreciate that. Any other question, Aditya?
Yes, sir. There is a question from Ushri Mukhopadhyay. She asks, if one of the prime objective Naqshbandi Sufi saints to attract you of Western countries towards their movement by organizing Sama, then why didn't they apply the same idea in South Asia?
Ushri, very good question. Ushri was a favorite student of mine, completed her MPhil under my supervision, now teaching in several places, including West Bengal State University. Ushri, are you teaching in West Bengal State University still? You must be. Very good question. Actually, in India, without subscribing to musical activities, it has been possible for the Naqshbandis to mobilize support, a huge amount of support in South Asia. But in the Western countries, in the context of the Western countries, it is very difficult to mobilize the young people if you exclude music. I interviewed some Jews in America. I interviewed some other Christian, very Orthodox Christian groups in America. During my research in America, I asked that why do you subscribe to music? Because when you go to Israel, some of the Jewish communities do not subscribe to music. That they clearly mentioned that unless you subscribe to music, it is very difficult to mobilize the American youth towards either Christianity or Judaism. So in India, it's not a problem. They have a huge amount of followers within India, South Asia, I would say, because that will include Bangladesh and Pakistan as well. So that is the reason. It is not a challenging job to mobilize support in the South Asian context. So that's why music is not compulsory here. But that's a very important mechanism in the Western scenario. Thank you, Sri, for your very good question. Any other question, please, Aditya?
Yes, sir. Sir, I move to the last question. There is a question from Shishir Chatterjee. He asks, সুফি নিয়ে বাংলাদেশে এবং বাংলায় লেখা কি কাজ হয়েছে বা কি বই আছে? ভারতে কিভাবে প্রথম সুফির আগমন ঘটে এবং সুফির কি কি প্রভাব দেখা যায় যা আজও আমরা পাই?
আমি বাংলায় বলছি, যেহেতু তোমার প্রশ্নটা বাংলায় ছিল। বাংলায় হয়েছে কাজ, বাংলায় কাজ হয়েছে, আরো কাজ হওয়ার অবকাশ আছে। যতটা হওয়ার দরকার ছিল ততটা হয়নি। আব্দুল করিমের বঙ্গে সুফি প্রভাব বইটা ভালো। এছাড়া তুমি যদি এনামুল হক রচনা সমগ্র দেখো, এনামুল হক রচনা সমগ্রে মৌলিক কাজ আছে সুফিজমের ওপর। এছাড়া সুকুমার সেনের যদি কাজ দেখো, ইসলামী বাংলা সাহিত্য আনন্দ পাবলিশার্স থেকে বেরিয়েছে সুকুমার সেনের, সেটা খুব ভালো কাজ। ইসলামের ওপর ভালো কাজ। ওসমান গনির যদি কাজ দেখো, সুফিদের ওপর বই আছে ওসমান গনির, ভালো কাজ। মোবারক করিম জওহরের কাজ আছে বাংলায় লেখা সুফিদের ওপর। আনন্দ ভট্টাচার্যের কাজ আছে, আমার একটা দুটো আর্টিকেল আছে, এবার একটা বই বেরোতে যাচ্ছে, সেখানে বাংলায় বেশ কিছু কাজ পাওয়া যাবে। টাইটেলটা বইয়ের ভাবিনি, প্রেসে গেছে বইটা, জয়েন্টলি আমি লিখেছি প্রফেসর রঞ্জিত সেনের সঙ্গে। সেখানে বাংলায় সুফিজমের উপর বেশ কয়েকটা আর্টিকেল পাবে। আরো কিছু কাজ আছে ছড়িয়ে ছিটিয়ে, আরো অনেক কাজ হতে পারতো। ইনডাইরেক্টলি কিছু কাজের কথা বলি যেটা বাংলায় সুফিজম সম্বন্ধে আমাদের সমৃদ্ধ করতে পারে। শক্তিনাথ ঝাড় বাউলদের উপর এই প্রশ্নটা কৃষ্ণান করেছিল। শক্তিনাথ ঝাড় বাউলদের উপর ভালো ভালো কাজ আছে, সেখানে সুফিজম সম্বন্ধে ভালো ইঙ্গিত দেওয়া যায়। আর এছাড়া আরেকজনের সুধীর কুমার চক্রবর্তীর বাংলায় ভালো কাজ আছে, সুফিদের উপর আলাদা করে না হলেও মরমী গানগুলোর উপর ভালো কাজ আছে, সেখানে সুফিজম সম্বন্ধে আমরা অত্যন্ত গুরুত্বপূর্ণ উপাদান পেয়ে থাকি। এই কাজগুলো আমরা দেখতে পারি যেগুলো আমাদের সমৃদ্ধ করে। সুফিজমের প্রভাব এখনকার দিনে কিভাবে আছে এটা খুব সংক্ষেপে বলে শেষ করি। এই যে সঙ্গীত, আমরা যে কীর্তিমোহন সেন রবীন্দ্রনাথের লেখায় এই যে ধনে হইয়া ধ্বনি মনিরে মাননা মনি, রবীন্দ্রনাথ বলছেন এই ভেরি কনসেপ্টটা কিন্তু সুফিদের থেকে এসেছে। দুর্বেশ কথাটা মানে হচ্ছে মতি তালাশ করনে বলা, এই মতি সে মতি নয়, এটা হচ্ছে একটা স্পিরিচুয়াল পাওয়ারের কথা বলা হচ্ছে। সুতরাং সেটা রবীন্দ্রনাথকে উজ্জীবিত করেছিল। সুতরাং রবীন্দ্রনাথকে বুঝতে গেলেও সুফিজম লাগে। আর রিসেন্টলি একজন পাঞ্জাবি স্কলারকে সাহিত্যিককে জিজ্ঞেস করা হয়েছিল পাঞ্জাবি সাহিত্যের ক্ষেত্রে সব থেকে বড় প্রভাব কিসের, তিনি বলেছিলেন, একটুও না থেমেই বলেছিলেন যে সুফিজমের প্রভাব সর্বাধিক পাঞ্জাবি সাহিত্যের ক্ষেত্রে। তাই তো জগজিৎ সিং এই গানটা গেয়ে গেছেন, দিল সে বেহতর কোই কিতাব নেই, দিল সে বেহতর, এই দিল কিতাবের কথাটাও সুফিজম থেকে জারিত হয়েছে। আমি আরো অনেক উদাহরণ দিতে পারতাম, কিন্তু সময়াভাবে আমার মনে হয় এই কতগুলো উদাহরণই যথেষ্ট, তোমাদের কাজে লাগবে। আরেকটা বইয়ের কথা বলি যেটা তোমরা দেখতে পারো, এটা অনুবাদের কাজে আমি একটা প্রজেক্টে যুক্ত আছি, এটা ইন্টারন্যাশনাল প্রজেক্ট, বাংলাদেশ থেকে প্রজেক্টটা স্পন্সর করা হয়েছে। আহমেদুল হক রচনা বলি, বাংলায় বেরিয়ে গেছে। আহমেদুল হক হচ্ছেন বাংলার রুমি বলে পরিচিত। তিনি বাংলায় রুমিকে শুধু অনুবাদ করেননি, এবং সুফি ভাবাপন্ন অনেক সাহিত্য তিনি স্রষ্টা এবং রচনাও করেছেন, অনুবাদও করেছেন। সুতরাং সেই বইটা দেখা যেতে পারে, বাংলা আহমেদুল হক রচনা বলি, সেটা ইংরেজিতে অনুবাদের দায়িত্বে আমরা আছি, অনেকে মিলে কাজ করছি। এটা একটা জয়েন্ট প্রজেক্ট, ইন্দো বাংলাদেশ জয়েন্ট প্রজেক্ট। সুতরাং বাংলায় প্রচুর কাজ হয়েছে, আরো অনেক কাজ হওয়ার অবকাশ আছে। তোমার প্রশ্নের জন্য অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ।
Sir, I have also a request. Sir, can you show the Persian scriptures again? Because most of the audience if, did not see this clearly. We get
Okay.
such comments.
Sure. I will show.
Thank you, sir.
Just a minute. Yeah. Just let me know whether you can see.
Yes, sir.
Can you see? Can you
No,
see?
sir. It's very gloomy actually.
Now?
No, sir.
Now? Is it better?
Yes, sir. Now, yes, sir. Quite.
You can see this one, na? This one you can see? This one?
No, sir.
I'm putting my finger. I'm indicating with my finger. Can you see?
No, sir. It's not visible.
Now?
Yes, sir.
So there are A, B, C, D. These are four, at least 3 couplets in Persian. I didn't
yes,
get the opportunity to elaborate, but I have only just discussed this by Nizamuddin Aulia, where there was the gender dimension. This scripture was there. This is the direct utterance of Nizamuddin Aulia, where he is speaking in favor of the role of women in spiritual activities.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
I actually
Thank you, sir.
I do not have the skill to do PowerPoint presentation via online. When I present physically, then I do rely on PowerPoint presentation, but I lack the skill to do it online. That's why I could not show you. Sorry for that.
No, sir, no problem, sir. Thank you, sir, for showing.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you so much.
thank you, sir, for the wonderful lecture and also answering the question that had come from the audiences. So, thank you, sir. And in the next lecture, we will have with us Professor Tirthankar Rai on 4th October. He will deliver a lecture on epidemics in Indian history. So we will meet you all again on 4th October. And thank you, sir, for such lecture once
Thank
again.
you. Very good evening, Shambhit and Aditya and all the listeners. I wish you all the best with your academic pursuits. Thank you very much. Bye and take
Thank you,
care.
sir. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.